Pawn to e4. Pawn to c6. Pawn to d4. Pawn to d5. Caro-Kann defense. Pawn to e5. Advance variation. Bishop to f5, getting the bishop out of the pawn chain. Knight to d2. Pawn to e6. Knight to b3, supporting d4 and difficulting the break on c5. Knight to d7. Knight to f3. Pawn to a6. Black is following a light squares strategy. He got his own light squares bishop out and now restricts his opponent homologous bishop. Bishop to e2. Pawn to c5. And black got what he wanted. A French structure with the French bishop out of the pawn chain. Pawn to c3. Pawn to h6. Creating a hideout for the f5 bishop and controlling the g5 square. The goat played the same position as white against Navarra in 2018. King to g1. Pawn to c4, closing the position. Black will attack on the queen side and white on the king side. Knight to d2. Pawn to b5. Knight to e1. Philidor's principle. The pieces behind the pieces. The horse goes backwards to unblock the f-pawn and to use the back rank as a trampoline to jump to a more active square. Knight to e7. The horse has been entrusted with the task of supporting the b4 break. White to play, what to move? If pawn to g4, a great move, starting the pawn storm with tempo. Pawn to f5 with counterattack. Knight to c2 was played in the game. Move 12 and we reach a brand new position. There are no game in Licious Masters database from here. Bishop to h7. Prophylaxis against g4. Pawn to f4. Pawn to h5. The pawn is untouchable because the h8 rook is protecting it through x-rays. Pawn to g3. In order to meet h4 with g4. Bishop to c2, removing the defender of b4. Queen to c2. Pawn to g6, drawing the V of victory on the board, and increasing the control of f5. Knight to f3. Knight to f5, centralizing the knight and releasing the dark dragon. Bishop to d2. Controlling the b4 break. Bishop to e7. King to g2, defending g3 and preparing h3 g4. Knight to b6. Pawn to h3. Pawn to h4, an interesting move, hitting the king side and creating an outpost on g3. Pawn to g4. Knight to g3. The knight has infiltrated on the opponent's camp. Moreover, it has the e4 square as a backdoor in case of being attacked. Rook to e1. Pawn to a5. Bishop to d1. White starts a maneuver to get rid of the annoying g3 knight. The first step is to increase the control of e4. Pawn to b4. Queen to c1. Queen to d7. Rook to e3, defending the third rank and freeing the e1 square to let the dark square's bishop attack the infiltrated horse. Rook to b8. Bishop to e1. Knight to e4. Bishop to c2. Knight to a4. Which knight do you want, asks black. Rook to b1. Pawn to c3. Pawn to c3. King to g8. White to play, what to move? If bishop to e4. Knight to b2 with counterattack. Queen to d1 was played in the game. Black to play. What to move? If knight to b2 a great move. Knight to d3 a great move, sacrificing a pawn to open the c-file. Rook to c8 with equality. Rook to b2 was played in the game, pinning the c2 bishop and attacking a2. Rook to b2. Knight to b2. White to play. What to move? If queen to b1. Pawn to a3 with equality. Queen to e2 a dubious move was played in the game. The queen retreats, leaving the queen side to black. The only hope for white now is to create a counterattack on the king side. Rook to b8. Knight to h4 a dubious move. Black to play. What to move? If pawn to g5 a brilliant move, opening the king side for the black's dragon. Hitting the rook. The two horses neigh in their majestic outposts. Bishop to c1 black is winning. Maybe the goat saw the g5 move but bitterly remembered his game against Gukesh where he opened both sides of the board. Knight to d3 was played in the game. Bishop to d3. Pawn to d3. Queen to d3. Rook to b2. Rook to e2. Queen to b7. White to play. What to move? If pawn to f5 a great move. King to f8 with equality. Knight to f3 was played in the game. White can't swap rooks because the second rank is weak. Pawn to a4, a small step for man and a giant leap for mankind, says the pawn. Pawn to h4, the and h pawns start their race. Pawn to a3. Pawn to h5. Pawn to h5. Pawn to h5. Rook to e2. Queen to e2. Queen to b2. King to f1. Perfect equilibrium. Each of black's threats is countered by white. Stockfish gives this an evaluation of 0.0. Queen to c1. Queen to g2. King to h7 a blunder. And the mistake starts to swarm during time trouble. Black has 110 seconds on the clock, while white 31 seconds. White to play. What to move? If pawn to f5 a great move, always look for break points. Pinning the horse. And white has the advantage. Pawn to h6 a mistake was played in the game. White advantage evaporates, threatening checkmate on g7. King to h6. Queen to h3. King to G7. Queen to G2. King to F8. White to play, what to move? If pawn to F5, a great move, deviating the E6 pawn. Pawn to E6, a great move. Queen to F5 with counterattack. Queen to H2, a dubious move, was played in the game, threatening checkmate on H8. King to E8. Now the king escapes safely. Queen to G2, a blunder. The last blunder? Queen to F4. King to E2. Queen to C1. King to F1. White still has some ideas. Black must stay alert till the end. Black to play. What to move? If knight to C3. Black still has the advantage, but there was a cleaner way of winning. Queen to D1, a great move, was played in the game, waiting for white to self-destruct. Queen to G8. Bishop to F8. White to play, what to move? If knight to G5. Queen to E1, black is winning. Queen to G2 was played in the game. The queen has to go back to the defense. Knight to C3. Queen to F2. Knight to E4. Queen to E3. Bishop to B4, attacking the pinned piece. King to G2. Queen to C2. The A2 pawn finally falls. King to H3. Bishop to E1. Queen to E1. Queen to A2. Queen to C1. Queen to F2. And white resigns. The game could continue as follows. Queen to C8. King to E7. Queen to C7. King to F8. Queen to D8. King to G7. King to G4. Problem. Find the checkmate in 4. Carlsen versus Caruana. A classic encounter. Black played the Caro-Kann and reached a French-like position with the bishop out of the pawn chain. The position was closed in the middle game. And it was all about maneuvering and finding the right break points. White attacked on the king side while black on the queen side. However, when white pushed his pawns allowed the creation of an outpost and black quickly infiltrated a knight on white's king side. The knight distracted white's pieces and after one inaccuracy black was able of taking the queen side. Black was unable to convert and evaporated his advantage by simplifying the position instead of opening the king side. The position was in perfect equilibrium. But both players had little time on the clock. Suddenly the goat blundered but white answered with another blunder. Just like Tartakower said, the winner of the game is the player who makes the next to last mistake.